Bioshock Infinite Burial at Sea is the storyline expansion to Bioshock Infinite. It's separated into two parts, Part 1 and Part 2. It's all one continuous storyline. But is it any good? Let's find out.
This world values children, not childhood. There's a profit to be made, and men who make it.
Burial at Sea is split up into two parts that are simply called Part 1 and Part 2. In essence, Part 1 is a little bit shorter, Part 2 is longer, and Part 2 is definitely the better segment of the two. So Burial at Sea starts with Booker DeWitt in his office in Rapture this time, and Elizabeth comes in and she's all sexy, she's kind of like a 50s movie star, and she gives you this mission where you have to find this little girl, and you don't know much about her, but it's like, hey, whatever, let's go along with it. And what's cool about the way that Burial at Sea Part 1 opens is that it's a lot like Bioshock Infinite's main campaign in the beginning, where there's no combat, you're just exploring, and you're going from place to place and talking to all these NPCs and really just getting the atmosphere in. You know, going back all the way to the way Half-Life 2 did it and even Half-Life 1, it's awesome to have this decent chunk of like 30 or 40 minutes of opening where you're just not having any combat at all, and you're exploring Rapture before the war between Ryan and Fontaine came down, so the shops are still vibrant and people are still at the bars and people are still having a great time, and people are all snobby and having their own dialogue and their own opinions about politics and stuff, and it's pure Ken Levine storytelling.
Compromise? Is that why we came to Rapture? I could compromise in Red Hook.
We're just men and women, Alan. You hold yourself to that standard, you'll never be happy.
In what country is there a place for men like me? Men who refuse to say yes to the doubters and the parasites.
Yes, but even Andrew Ryan takes a vacation.
You even run into Sander Cohen again. He was that really weird guy from Bioshock 1 that would make the piano player explode because he missed a note or something like that. And he still has that same attitude when it comes to directing a dance couple.
Fitzpatrick! Please! The stick!
Santa, for God's sake!
My muse shall not be mocked!
Not only that, you can see his prowess in filmmaking. That's right, you can watch a couple of short silent films that he did, and they are just as bizarre as you would expect. So after the intro, which is 30 to 40 minutes long, where you're exploring the area and there's no combat, finally you get back into the combat, which is basically the same as Bioshock Infinite. Elizabeth is still with you, she still tags along, she still gives you money when you need money and ammo when you need ammo and things like that. And most of the guns and the plasmids are the same as they were in Bioshock Infinite, but they do introduce this one awesome new weapon called the radar range. And when I first heard about it, I thought it was just like you have a radar and it has range, but no, this is a gun that is basically like a little mini satellite dish that you hold in your hands, and what it does is it fires this continuous laser, and if you can hold it on an enemy long enough, it will explode them instantly, and anyone who's nearby will also explode. That is fantastic. It's like a gun out of Borderlands or something like that. Once you get this gun, you will not want to use any other gun for the rest of the time playing Burial at Sea. Elizabeth can still open tears the same way that she can do in Bioshock Infinite, where you look one way and you can like spawn some ammo or spawn some like med packs or something like that. You can even have her spawn a live samurai to help you now. That's right, an actual samurai in late 1950s underwater fiction. That is so weird. I don't care. It's awesome. Keep it in the game. In fact, I really wish there were more things like that. A samurai in Bioshock. Somehow that's so weird it just fits. Now I'm not going to spoil the story, okay? I'm never going to spoil the story of Bioshock. No self-respecting person would do that. But I will say that the cliffhanger for Burial at Sea Part 1 will make you want to start Part 2 right away. And like I said, Burial at Sea Part 1 and Part 2 are all just one long continuous story. They aren't separate DLCs storyline-wise, it's all one continuous story. So Part 1 ends with some pretty intense stuff, and then the way Part 2 opens, it's amazing. It is just as good as Bioshock Infinite's main campaign beginning. In fact, it might even be more amazing, because you are not expecting to be the character that you are, and you're definitely not expecting to be in the setting that you are, and you get up from the table that you're sitting at, and you're wandering through this area, and it is magical, it is colorful, it is musical, everyone's happy, and you're just like, you just know that it's going to go dark and go all Bioshocky, and sure enough it does. Okay, so I will spoil who you play as in Part 2 because it is part of the main gameplay. You play as Elizabeth this time. Booker is not the main character this time. And what makes this so good is that it changes the way you play the game. Essentially, Part 2 is more like stealth. It is not straight up action the way that Bioshock always has been. The easiest way to describe the gameplay in Burial at Sea Part 2, where you play as Elizabeth, is that it's like Dishonored. It's like Dishonored because it's stealthy and you're always sneaking around left and right and trying to avoid enemies, and you even have access to a crossbow which you can use to knock out guards. And even later you get these gas arrows that allow you to knock out guards all in one area. That is awesome that they changed the gameplay because it keeps it so fresh, and it prevents Bioshock Infinite Burial at Sea from becoming just one long story intensive campaign with little gameplay changes. I mean, if you're going to make a DLC, change it up, make it interesting, and that's exactly what they did with Part 2. It's so much like Dishonored. It even has the same little icons over enemies' heads when they like sort of see you, but they don't really see you. It's like those little lightning bolts. If you've played Dishonored, you'll know what I'm talking about. And like Dishonored, the levels in Part 2 of Burial at Sea are open. You don't always have to go right in the middle. You can go left this way, like in this vent, or you can sneak around to the right this area. And you can even jump on the little skyhook things to stay out of the way and jump down and knock them down, and it's awesome. It gives you so much gameplay choice. You even get this ability called Peeping Tom, which allows you to see enemies through walls, much in the same way you can see enemies through walls in Dishonored or Deus Ex Human Revolution, and that is a staple of modern stealth games that I am perfectly okay with. I know a lot of people might think that it makes the game too easy, but for me, I welcome it. Now, Elizabeth does have access to guns. In fact, much of the same guns that Booker had, but the difference is that she is not as strong defensively, so she can only get shot a couple times and then she's gone. She really has to stay hidden, so you'll be crouching throughout most of Part 2 just to stay out of the enemy's way. There's even a section where you actually go back to Columbia for Bioshock Infinite. Granted, you're not there for a long time, and you're not outdoors enough, but it's still nice to have like a decent chunk of that, maybe like an hour or so, where you're actually getting out of Rapture and going back to the amazing visuals that were Bioshock Infinite. But the coolest thing about Burial at Sea Part 2 is the way that the story ends and comes full circle with the beginning of Bioshock 1. And the way it does it is the same way that Bioshock Infinite kind of took liberties with storytelling, so you kind of have to suspend your disbelief a little bit. But trust me, if you love Bioshock stories, if you love Bioshock Infinite's storyline, you have to play Burial at Sea. You absolutely have to play it. Right now, Burial at Sea is $15 for Part 1 and $15 for Part 2, but you can get them both combined for $20. Absolutely get them both combined for $20 because this is one continuous storyline and it ends really awesomely, and the way that Part 1 ends, you just have to play Part 2 right there. There's just no question about it. Overall, Burial at Sea is a pretty good DLC storyline-wise. The gameplay is kind of disappointing in Part 1 because it's much the same, even though they added in the awesome radar range gun and the ability to get a samurai and things like that, but it's really Part 2 that's the meat of this whole experience. It feels different from traditional Bioshock gameplay because it's more stealth-oriented, and at the same time you're playing as Elizabeth, so it's cool that you're changing protagonists this time. And overall, it's definitely a must-play to anyone that loves Bioshock or loves Bioshock 2 or loves Bioshock Infinite, at least storyline-wise. Alrighty, time to turn off this video and play some Burial at Sea. Go do it, right now.